Aloha, everyone. My name is Jason Schwartz. We're here at the Neutral Zone, MauiNeutralZone.com. We're on KAKU Radio, 88.5 FM, and we're on Akaku Maui Community. Used to be TV, now we call it media. And you can find it up on YouTube. I have a very, very special guest today. I am sitting here with Cara Flores. Cara is running for the Kahului seat of the Maui County Council here in 2022. Some of you might say, well, Jason, aren't you running for that same seat? And I must say, yes, I am. But I'm not running against anyone. I'm running because I think I'm a good candidate with a lot to offer. And when I met Cara, I said, oh, here's a lady that also has a lot to say and a lot to offer. Why not have her on the show so the public can see her and see me all the time, but see her and get to know her up close and personal. Welcome, Cara. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on.
I guess, anytime I ask a question, realize I want you to say, well, how would you answer that? If anything I'm saying, because why are you running? What made you decide to run this time?
The housing crisis has gotten to a point where normal people cannot get housing anymore, like for rent, for sale. It's just become really impossible. I have 3 kids at 3 different levels of school. So elementary, middle school, and high school. And over the last few years, I know there's been 6 teachers that have left that I know personally because of the cost of living and housing specifically. So I just, I've been doing housing for 15 years and I really like, working with first-time home buyers. I like to help people find rentals, and it's become impossible for people to do that. And I just see the trajectory we're on is getting worse. And I spent a lot of time thinking about it, considering it. It's a big job. I did feel a very great sense of responsibility to do something because I do have a depth of knowledge about housing specifically. And I've done a lot of research and been on a lot of panels and with solving housing crisis issues. And I've read through our county's report that they paid for about solving the housing crisis. And I feel like I understand it enough to implement some of the solutions. And I really just want to see that happen so that people can have housing.
In the solutions that you hear proposed, you, like I, recognize that homelessness and not enough housing are kind of 2 separate issues, but they sort of interweave and the public gets very confused. You're talking about, I'm guessing, we have an extraordinary deficiency in the number of affordable places to buy and rent. Yeah. And to catch up is an extraordinary feat. The county has proposed a few things like, how about Mike Victorino taking credit for that? Mike Atherton and Waikapu is going to have 1,500 houses, 500 affordable. We don't know what that price is yet, but that's going to be years away and millions of dollars away. And what about all the other people that are in the meantime need? There's no one talking about this emergency condition, which to me, if you can't find housing, whether you're homeless or whether someone just sold your house and now you have to figure out where to get a 2-bedroom, and you were paying a lot at $2,000 and now it's $3,500. Crazy increases. You've seen it.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do except to declare an emergency for now and find land that we have and, start something that I really am a little overwhelmed. Do you have any thoughts about that? Because when I think about the housing like you're talking about, I was in the mortgage business and real estate, and I used to want to only work with local people. I really didn't feel comfortable about selling houses to people from the mainland coming here and renting it out, which now I guess that's mostly what we see, I'm wondering, what do you think's been going on that we haven't seen it from the people that are in office now? Any thoughts of that? or where we can go from here?
Yeah, so I mean, I know Gabe Johnson and a couple other council members have been working on this issue. And I mean, I really like the direction that Gabe Johnson's going, and he's working on it pretty much full time, you know what I'm saying? But I think it's such a huge crisis that it would be helpful to the community to have more than one person working on it full time. And so I know there's a senator on Oahu who's really been working on it. I met with him for an hour. His name's Stanley Chang. And there's some, you know, politicians and nonprofits who are working on solutions in California. And there are some good ideas that were put together in the U Hero report that just came out, you know, this last year for our county. Our county commissioned that and paid to get, you know, 19 experts to put together a solution, but a lot of the solution requires legislative action. And so, you know, that's where I see that we just need people to start doing things to make it happen, because according to that report, we needed 5,500 homes within 5 years. I think it's probably a lot more than that. Me because too. The report isn't looking at, you know, people who are several families living under one roof because they have no other option. If you start looking at that situation of overcrowded housing, I think we need, you know, tens of thousands of places for people. And so I do think there's, you know, it's really complicated. Like, you know, there's not like a single silver bullet solution that, oh, if we just did this, it would solve our housing crisis. But there's a lot of little things we could do. So one big thing that I see for families, because I do have young kids and talk to a lot of working families, is there's a lot of fair housing discrimination going on against families with children. And we don't have anyone in our county who's enforcing fair housing laws. And so just to get, you know, more of a focus on that and make sure people aren't being discriminated against when they go to get housing, you know, specifically rentals, but also sometimes with sales, just making sure that families aren't being passed over for the retired couple who wants to move to Maui and live in this rental, and they're probably not going to cause any damage to it, and they're willing to pay 6 months up front. You know, the landlord, of course, says, oh yeah, that's the better family, I want to pick them. But you're not allowed to just pick your favorite person and discriminate against the people you think might be worse off for you as a landlord for your property. And I don't think people understand that. And it's really frustrating because I've worked with families trying to get them housing, and they get passed over, and we don't really get a good reason why. You know, they have income, they have good credit. There's no reasonable, you know, explanation why they didn't get the property.
That's a very, very difficult thing to kind of nail down. Like you say, I remember the discrimination laws when I was taking my continuing education real estate classes. That was the big one we saw. But it's sort of hard to identify and prove. And either way, we both come out with the same answer. We need more housing. We need more housing. We need an emergency housing. We need more housing. If we can have thousands of refugees that housed immediately, why can't we do something for people? That's what I don't get. I don't know where the power lies to create emergency housing, emergency situations. While we're building these long-range plans, we're so disrupted. It's very upsetting. It upsets me because I see regular people now being put into this homeless situation with literally no, you know, whether it's the family with the kids, and I'm just saying, or the retired couple. But I get it. When the people are coming from the mainland to having the big money, they sure are attractive to these owners that are renting out their places. So that's a real problem. And I sure hope that gets addressed legislatively. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm back to that thing about housing. How do we, you know, we can put up tents, the army and the, you know, they can do it in 2 seconds, clear an area, make it available, make it safe. I don't know why that stuff isn't happening.
Yeah. Well, and they're planning to take down that encampment that they put up with those small temporary homes right next to on Waiale next to the jail right there. There's that park. They put up all those temporary homes, and I just read they're going to take those down. And so we're actually getting rid of housing.
And those have cost so much money. They're little metal boxes, and they pour air conditioning in them full blast because they're little roasting pits.
Yeah.
But why can't you create it? I don't understand. You know, we could create offices with cubicles. We can create tents. I don't know who has that authority. I don't think the council people actually have any authority. The mayor has take care of the departments, right? So all we can do from the council is legislate.
Yeah, and they control the purse strings. And so, that is one thing I would have liked to see done better with all the pandemic money. I mean, we had $100 million, over $100 million of pandemic money. And I think a lot more questions should have been asked before it was allocated and used in the budget, because I don't see a lot of permanent structures or permanent, benefit to the community from that. And I feel, we should have been focusing on building shaded outdoor areas so people could gather safely and spend less time indoors. We should have been improving ventilation in older buildings and doing things that are more permanent, which other municipalities did. And they could have created a lot of housing with that, because part of the problem with the pandemic was in congregate settings where people can't get away from each other, it just spreads like crazy. And they could have started building housing with that money to be able to spread people out. And so I think it is a combination of, you have to have an administration that's on board, and you have to have a mayor who wants to get this done. And so any mayor who thinks, closing down housing right now and taking away housing units is a good idea, it's beyond me. We have a huge housing crisis. We need a mayor who wants to create housing for the people who live here. And we need a council who's going to get on board with that too, which most of our council is, I think, but who can get on board and help create the plan with the mayor's office to solve this, because it's going to take a lot of little things. So I said, we could crack down on fair housing. That would help. That wouldn't solve the housing crisis. But, other municipalities do this. And the way that it gets done is they have people who go and try to apply kind of, I don't know what you would call it, like secret shoppers, but HUD, does enforcement, and they make sure, like, why aren't you taking your applicants in chronological order and deciding, like, if you're not taking them in chronological order, it's really hard for you as the landlord to explain why you picked one over the other, but didn't discriminate. Because if they're not in chronological order, what criteria did you use? And was it fair and applied to everybody, right? And so there's those kind of things. We have a supply issue and a demand issue in Maui that's very unique to us. I mean, the whole country is experiencing a housing crisis, but we do have an undersupply. As you probably know, millennials are the largest home buying generation right now. Gen Z is an even bigger generation. So when they start buying, there's going to be even more demand.
The question is at what price, right? I mean,
well, and this idea that, in the 50s and 60s, there was a huge housing boom to help supply housing for baby boomers. And the idea that, those houses can just go to the future generations and get passed down is a nice idea. But what's actually happening is a lot of boomers are just holding their assets. And so now you have all these people who maybe they're just a married retired couple. They own 4 or 5 homes, and they're just collecting, rent or holding their assets, holding them empty. We have a lot of empty homes on Maui. And so the way to solve that side is there's not enough supply and there's too much demand. So you have to address both sides. And so on the supply side, to free up more supply, you can either build it, which we can't totally build ourselves out of this, because if we just build, there's so much demand that people who don't live here will buy it. So you have to have very specific development that's for only residents, that stays only for residents in perpetuity. So forever and ever, the homes that get built need to be for owner occupant use only. You have to live there as your primary residence. You have to file your taxes in Hawaii. You know, you have to be a full-time resident here. I think that's appropriate, and that can be done through deed restrictions. The other way you increase the supply is you make it a lot more costly to do the things you don't want to see. So you de-incentivize those things, which our council has been working on. So
yeah, they've been really good at it. Yeah. They've been really making great strides, like you say.
You can free up hundreds, maybe thousands of units that way, but you need both. We need to build more housing because there's physically not enough, and you need to also free up housing that's already built. Freeing up housing that's already built is more immediate, but you know, for the long term, for the 5 years down the road from now, we need to be building right now.
And we need to find a way the thing that I don't know is how are we going to solve the maybe it's all across the country and I just don't know it, but we sure have so many homeless that are virtually everywhere.
Yeah.
And whenever I speak to them, they just have nowhere to go, and there's no programs to the organized programs for housing and the social services seem to be married together. And if some of these people don't fit into the box of the social service help or don't want some of it, they're not getting out of that problem on the street. That's why I guess I'm going back to that. And I wonder, you and I both, like, could we do this being on council or not being on council? Somehow, like our ideas that we're talking about, the people that are on council are either so busy dealing with alligators they're already dealing with and so busy with all the problems that have mounted up. What can we do? What can we encourage our public to do to help us do this? Because isn't that what it really is going to take? Pressure from the public to the people that are like the mayor. You said it. When we have emergency $100 million or however much it was from the COVID, why aren't we addressing these public emergencies in a more immediate way to really help everyone and not be so? I mean, those 23 places you're talking about there next to the jail cost a bloody fortune. That's ridiculous numbers. And like you said, 23 families, and you're telling us you have a housing, that's your housing solution? Or it's ridiculous.
Yeah, well, so as the public, we need to keep putting pressure on our government, but I do think there are things that only the legislative branch can do, and that's where we need them to help. You know, with Mike Molina passing the Affordable Housing Fund, that created money that can only be used for creating housing now for our local residents. So now we're at a point where we're starting to build that up, and that's awesome. But we need to have plans for how to use it well and make sure it starts getting executed right away and start groundbreaking. And so I think, you know, for the public to understand what the issues are and what helps and what doesn't, and understand what the plan is, you know, like check out Gabe Johnson's plan on his website. It's pretty thorough and pretty good. And to call in and publicly support those things when they come forward. Another thing that could be done to help housing supply, and I've been going and knocking on doors and talking to people, and I've been mostly focused here in Kahului because I live right here and it's easy. And but I plan to go knock doors everywhere, you know. But what people have told me here, because there's a lot of older plantation style single wall construction homes, is I'd like to build an ohana, but the permitting process is so long. There's so much red tape. It's so difficult. But I'd like my kids to just live on our lot. But either I'm going to end up building it unpermitted, or they already did, or they have to come up with this, money to go through the process, which there should be a process, for safety and whatever. But I do think on the supply side, we could say, hey, for owner builders, if you're building your own home or you're building an Ohana unit on your own property, and it's going to be for local use, either your family or you rent it out to other residents or whatever, or maybe you move into the Ohana because you're retired and raised your kids and you rent out the home to a local family, that we have a fast track process for you to do that. And maybe you can apply for it once every 20 years or something, so that somebody's not abusing it, but that's something, it's a simple solution that would have to go through the legislative branch. It would have to be a change in our ordinance to make that happen. But all of a sudden now you're letting local people start solving some of our supply side issues. You're letting local people move 3 families from 1 housing unit into 3 housing units on their property if they have, an acre and a half or something. And so you make it easier for people to solve their own problems, and people will do that. We see that all the time. The community comes together and people will do the work to solve their own problems, but we do need help from the legislative side to overcome those obstacles.
And you just mentioned an acre. When you said an acre and a half, that triggered me thinking, and even less,
Yeah.
Around we are an island, and I think we've already kind of forgotten that in the whole way we've been building this place out. Yeah. We don't have the same issues that they do on the mainland. We can't push our problems out and push them out of city limits. We run into a water problem.
Yeah. So, very much so. Yeah.
So I when I'm listening to all this, and I recognize what you're saying is absolutely right on the money. See, you're the kind of candidate, I want to say, like me, with the programs are in place and we can be moving these things forward. But I'm wondering, I keep wanting to appeal to again, maybe this is as well as, right? These large landowners that have large swaths of land and they have so much equity there. They could be partnered with the people that move the land and construct it, and an equity sharing program where over time the big landowners and construction people could get more ownership, and they could supplement and make these things affordable and create the places. I don't know why we don't see more of that. 80, I don't know exact number, but I think it was $87 million for the infrastructure cost there in Waikapu to come out with 500 affordable houses. You probably saw that article just like I did. Like, it sure seems like extraordinary that could be picked up by someone who owns the land, because they don't. If Mike Atherton were to make what they project in these articles, $150 million, what does he need $150 million in his pocket? Why couldn't some of that be equity that he gains over time to get this thing happening more quickly? I don't really understand that we don't use the power. It's kind of a fun power. Eminent domain. That means we like your land. We don't really want to take it. What if we become partners? Can't we do that? Isn't that a better way? Because we really have these. You said 5,000 units they say we need. I think we can laugh together. It was 20 years ago when I heard them say we needed 5,000 units.
Yeah.
I don't know how they recalculate now and come out with 5,000. Someone missed a digit somewhere.
We need a lot more housing. And, I do think there needs to be a paradigm shift on housing, not just in Maui County, I think nationwide, because it is such a crisis, but it's a bigger crisis in Maui than most places, of how we think about housing. And this is hard. Like, I know a lot of realtors may not like this shift, but right now we think of housing as this commodity, to be bought and sold in a way that's, it's a very Western way of thinking about housing. And we need to start thinking about housing as a human right. And if we think about it from that way, then operating in a capitalist society and infrastructure with, the free market, the landowners will always try to maximize their profit, and we can expect that, and corporations are going to do that. So to hope that other people will solve our housing crisis for our residents, being developers or anyone else that's not the government, I think is hoping for capitalism to work different than it ever has. For them to put the greater good of the community above their own profit, I don't think that's realistic. And so I think we have to start looking at housing the way that places that have solved their housing crisis much better have done it. And that's what we're seeing in the legislation and some of the nonprofits in California. That's what they're trying to pass on Oahu right now, is this government developed housing, and people have a really bad connotation with that because we think of the projects. And the government traditionally in America has done a terrible job of developing housing, because they make it only for the poor. It's not housing you'd want to live in. And then they just forget about it and stop maintaining it. It starts falling apart. It becomes the projects, and no one wants to live in the projects. But other countries and other places now are starting to look at developing housing that's mixed use. It would be multifamily residential type of high density housing. Maybe you have, start thinking about being more creative, where you have pools and tennis courts and you have shops on the bottom, and you have some homes that are 4-bedroom and really nice, and you have some that are really small and more affordable. But you have this mixed use of housing where everyone in the community lives there, because we know in neighborhoods and condominiums where you have a lot of high income earners, they tend to be really maintained well. And so why do we have to separate the poor live over here, the rich live over here? What would be wrong with a doctor living next to a waiter, in the same building? And you start developing infrastructure and housing in a way where you're just trying to provide long-term housing. And the way that you keep it affordable, at least in Hawaii, and it's so common that it'd be easy to do here, is kind of through a land trust model, which is actually what was recommended in that UHERO report. So Hawaiian Homes already does it, right? The Hawaiian Homes, they keep the land and you get the house. You get a 99-year lease. If we could do that for all Maui residents who qualified, and not have it limited to affordable housing for, 60% AMI or less, have it be everybody, have a little bit of everything for everybody. I think you would get high quality housing that people wanted to live in. Their mortgage payments would be half or less of what traditional housing is, because the land is already owned. And if the county owns the land, or a nonprofit or somebody owns the land, they can control and regulate the use on that land. So they can say, you have to be a resident to buy here. You can't buy this as an investment property to rent it out to someone else. If you want to live here, you buy it, you live here, this is your full-time gig. And so I think that's the direction that we need to start thinking is.
I hear you, and I like your ideas. I think that the only thing I keep looking at is the short term. I'm trying to think about what to do quicker. And I really like that you're thinking over the horizon. And when you talk about the land owned by the county, my only idea was, yes, you're right. These people are not going to give up their profit. So include them in it rather than the county having to provide the land. I was just trying to get the private sector to get more involved with that. That was really
buy-in. Yeah.
Let them to buy in. It's not going to do any, they're not going to be ever touching that money. They're way above having to worry about the little money. That's what I was talking. And again, this island thing, we're talking about like mixed use. When I said, oh yeah, they're Kihei, they're at the corner of Lapoa and Kihei Road. People live above their stores. Every city in the world is doing that. And here it's a novel concept. What is that? Why does it take so long for something? It's
like that is a very Western thing that I think when it was developed, city planning ideas. I mean, I've been looking into this. It was developed by people who were very wealthy in America specifically. And the wealthy people didn't want to live where they worked because they frowned upon that, or they didn't work, And so this idea of separating your residential from your commercial and keeping workplaces and shopping far away from your home, it's a very elitist ideal, and it depends on having a car. And I think now we can look at it and go, that's not even what we want for most people. I mean, I would love to live in a walkable area where I can walk down to my grocery store and walk to the kids' school and walk to, the doctor's office. That sounds great. If I didn't have to use a car, especially, older people who need exercise and whatever. I know my mother-in-law would love that, but it's just that's not how our city's designed right now. But in the future, I think we should shift the way we design our land so that we are focused on bikeability, walkability, easy access to green spaces, giving people a higher quality of life. And it builds the community because you tend to stay in your little area and get to know everybody. And ultimately, it makes it just a better place and safer. And for the more immediate use or need, I think the county can kind of pull back on some regulations and maybe I like Kelly King's idea of creating a safe space for people who do live in their vehicle to be able to go charge their phone, take a shower, just have a little bit of dignity in a place where they're not going to get swept out of. And creating spaces for now for that. Also, the county could go and start trying to implement and enforce better, cracking down on short-term rentals. So those become long-term rentals. They could push and advertise more their long-term rental credit, because I know a lot of people aren't aware of that. And maybe if, landlords knew there was an incentive and they would save a lot in tax money every year, they would choose to rent out their units long-term instead of short-term. And so if more landlords were aware of that, they may choose to do that because it's less hassle to have a long-term tenant than constant turnover of short-term. So we have all those properties on the Minatoya list. Some of them are pretty old and run down, and those owners might prefer to rent long-term if they understood how much money they could save, because right now they're paying the highest tax bracket. And so I think some of it could be communication. The county could look into buying privately developed areas that are run down and trying to fix them up, because that's a lot faster than starting from scratch and turning those into social type housing. But there's a lot that can happen short term. It wouldn't be as high quality as what we could do long term with planning. But I think we need both, right? Because we have all these kids graduating right now, going to college. Why would they come back here? They have nowhere to live. They have no opportunity here. We've made it inadvertently. I don't think anybody intended for this, but we've made it where it's better for our kids to leave and never come back than to come back and build their future here, because there's just not opportunity here.
And and I keep wondering about the room. Maybe an island isn't supposed to say, look, we don't have any more room. We don't want to keep building and building and building. We're not a mainland. We're the most remote landmass in the world. We need to really put our focus on self-sustainability. So it's a real complicated issue. You're hearing it, you're expressing. Housing. I mean, it's that old thing about there are so many alligators. It's difficult to remember that you came here to drain the swamp. It's a very funny thing, politics. We have 7 people in the primary. Isn't that crazy in the race that we're running? 7 people, and the public gets to kind of find a little about this. I found about you, I know Tony over there at KAKU. And when I said, oh, Cara, he said, oh, I know Cara. She was here. She was the voice and sharing with people about COVID and the masks and the whole thing. So
Yeah.
what other issues do you feel are in your view? I mean, my view as a candidate, I am really pushing the fact that there's no over the horizon programs to develop jobs and create an industry other than tourism, to try to use our local economy and give our people opportunities. And art and music and culture were my plan vehicle, and taking money for things. But all these things take a future over the horizon. Do you find that young people now are interested in politics when you get out there? Do you find that, I mean, I know I'm wondering, what is it that's going to grab the younger people to realize they have to be part of this solution thing? They're the ones going to be saddled. I'm 71. You know, if I live 30 years, thank you, God, you know, it's the people that are after us that are going to deal with all these problems and mistakes that we have to start dealing with now. Change, you know, we talk about housing. What about one of our candidates is living in a communal situation on land where maybe there's 35 people, common kitchens, and I'm sure I hope we build alternative potential plans because the things are changing. Yeah. Work is changing. The concept of what we want as families are changing. Young people who don't want the responsibility of property and the traditional model. It's almost like a different world is kind of happening around us.
I mean, I feel like young people not wanting a yard and not wanting like the single family detached home is a little off from when I talk to people. I think people are adjusting their expectation due to reality. But, you know, I get frustrated that younger people aren't more involved in politics. When I looked at who all voted, you know, it is mostly older people, and it is mostly, I feel that the older generation doesn't necessarily always understand the plight of the younger generation and the lack of opportunity that is here now and that was there before. And so, you know, decades ago, you could buy a house with a yard and raise your family there and kind of have the American dream. And I don't think that is an opportunity that the younger generations now have at, you know, with the average home price being $1 million. And so I think there's been an adjustment of expectation due to the reality of what we're seeing. And I do worry that younger people are becoming cynical because we're paying Social Security. You know, my kids will pay Social Security. The likelihood that they'll actually ever get any Social Security, highly unlikely. I mean, they've already pushed me and my husband's age of retirement. I think it's 76 or 78. I don't remember what it is now, but it's not 65. You know, it's my mother-in-law started collecting Social Security. We helped her with that, helped her get the Medicare and everything. And, you know, she'll probably live a long time because we have such a long life expectancy now. And I think it's wonderful that she can retire and enjoy her life and, you know, live out all the rest of her life just with, you know, a decent income that can get her by enough, even though the cost of housing is impacting that. We are helping her currently, but, you know, our generation, we're not going to be able to do that. And we've gone through 2 financial downturns and a lot of companies don't have pensions. And so the idea that we'll have something other than Social Security to help us out, like a 401k, well, I've watched my 401k jump up and down for decades now. And when we first started putting in, as learning about it, I was told I was going to have $2 million by the time I was 50. And by the time I retire, I'd just have this huge fund. And I can tell you, it's nothing close to that.
I really totally get it. It's amazing.
It's not even close to $1 million, and so, and we've been lucky because we bought property young. And that's very fortunate for us. We were lucky that we took that opportunity, because if we hadn't, people who do not own property right now have such little opportunity to permanently, have housing and have savings, because that is most people's number one asset, largest asset above their retirement, and everything else is usually the home they own. And young working families cannot buy a home right now. Average home price is over $1 million. That's a $5,000 a month mortgage payment. I don't know anybody who can afford that.
That's what I say. I agree.
I think, with other issues, I'm really worried about climate change. I take it very seriously. I have 3 young kids, and they're going to be hugely impacted by it. And so when I see things like our state legislator decided to cap solar and, non-firm energy at 45% for each island, I think that's bananas. What are we doing? I mean, it's the cheapest, easiest form of creating electricity in a place where we're so close to the equator. We have so much sun. Battery technology has just been getting better and better by every year, and the efficiency, that why would we limit our best possible solution for the future? And so, that's frustrating, because I take it as a personal attack on my children. I'm like, you are going to burn trees and put carbon into the air for what? For somebody somewhere had to pay for something, to get that to pass. I think.
When I'm hearing you, the one thing it does to me is it makes me feel comfortable. You may not have seen it, but in 1995, I interviewed the president of Maui Electric about self-sustainability and solar energy. 3 decades later, and we still have people doing the things you're talking about, limiting renewables at a time when the crisis is even more clear. It's a crazy life. We still have a little bit of time, but when I do this, I somehow want to give you plenty of time if there are issues that you'd like to share with our audience and the people. And then, I just want to give you more time because we're talking about this issue, and man, this issue of housing and all the things with quality of life. On council, obviously that's a real good issue, and it's really terrific to hear how you've kept up with what's going on, and sounds like you can hit the ground running on that issue. Other areas that you'd like to share with the audience? Obviously, you wonder, why am I as candidate doing this? I want people to be involved with this. If they think that you're the best candidate for the job, I want them to be comfortable to know that they heard it here, that we're an open forum so that we can continue on getting public input and working together for solutions,
Yeah, I do think we import way too much of our food. And especially with the pandemic showing us, we're lucky. We got out of the pandemic really on a good note compared to other places. And it could have been much worse. We really, I feel, dodged a bullet, and people can be critical. I'm not happy with how our pandemic unfolded as far as the use of funds and the plan. I think it had a lot of pukas. I think we kind of went in with, a hammer instead of a scalpel as far as dealing with things. We didn't have a very detailed plan, but compared to every other state, I think we came out a lot better, because there were a lot of people who died here and suffered, but almost everyone I know who had a huge impact it was on the mainland. The friends and family I lost were on the mainland. And I know people here who have long COVID, who have, who passed away, but we just weren't nearly as impacted. And we're really lucky because had it hit in a way where it took out our shipping, or something like that,
Yeah.
it could have been much worse. And it just opened my eyes to the fact that we need to grow our own food here. So I think we should incentivize home gardening, get more people just grow more food if they have land, even if they're a renter, if there's a way that we can help encourage that, I think, financially or otherwise, that would be awesome because it empowers you to know you can grow your own food. I mean, I learned how to grow microgreens and all kinds of vegetables and stuff, thinking, what if our food shuts down? I have 3 kids to feed. What will we do? And I feel confident in the fact that I can grow a lot of greens really quickly if I had to. And, I bought a lot of seeds and learned a lot of skills that I think we should all have at this point being on an island, because pandemics aren't the only disaster that we'll have. We're going to potentially, with climate change, have some huge storms come through, and that can disrupt shipping. There's a lot of things that can disrupt shipping. And so growing more local food, I think, is critical.
And you've seen that there are, I always wonder if the media here, the media is sort of like the corporate America. They're running after the money, even in the stories they tell. Food Security Hawaii, you see all these groups around here that are waving that flag as hard as they can, and more will be coming. So I'm glad you're waving the flag with me. And it's a great thing.
Yeah. And I think, for overall, because when people talk about diversifying the economy, there is something that it's more of a big picture idea, but you have to have a community where people enjoy living there. And I think the grind has gotten too hard for people. Everyone's stressed. I feel like everybody needs like a 2-year-long break right now to recover. And there's more crazy going on in the world. And it's unfortunately probably not going to stop. Right. And so, because there are no people in power who are doing what needs to be done right now to make things, to change our course. And so we can keep trying to get that to happen. But also, I think it's important to realize that if we build a good community where people want to live and want to stay and want to invest, and we have people who have a high quality of life living here. So that's going to take a lot of work on our part and the government's part, and maybe some outside the box thinking and open-mindedness. But that's where you get innovation. That's where you get new industries. That's where when you talk about transitioning away from tourism and diversifying our economy, well, people have to want to live here and work here to make that happen. People have to be able to live here and work here. And so, I care about a lot of different issues, especially regarding quality of life. But that's why I always come back to housing, because if people don't have secure housing, I know a student I substitute taught this past year because we had such a huge crisis in the schools, and in one of my kids' schools, they were having kids go in the cafe a lot and just sit there during class because they didn't have enough substitute teachers. And so I decided to do the substitute teacher course and sub, and that was really hard work.
And, I did it myself.
Yeah, I appreciate teachers so much more now. But it's one of those things. One of the students has moved 6 times this school year, they were sharing with me. And one school year, I think, how do you even care what your grades are? Like, there's a lot of talk about the kids came back from the pandemic and they don't want to do schoolwork or they don't care anymore. And I think, how do you make a person who's having to constantly move, whose home life is so unstable, care about this? Is such a small thing compared to that they're going through a crisis. I know students who live in a van There's a lot of students, when I ask the students, hey, what matters to you guys in the community, just trying to feel out what this younger generation's worried about. Some of them are worried about the parks because they spend a lot of time in the parks. And it made me realize we should be dumping a lot more money into our public infrastructure that our residents use. And people who are in crowded housing situations, they really appreciate our public spaces. And if we build those up, that gives them a better quality of life. Even if we can't get them a bigger housing situation right away, at least we can make spaces where they can go spread out and enjoy their day, so they can spend a lot of time out of their home and still have a high quality of life. And so, investing in that is worth it. But even with middle schoolers, the number one thing they all said, housing. They're all worried about housing, because even if they have housing, their best friend doesn't, or their cousin doesn't, someone doesn't. They have, another family living in their living room, sleeping on the couch because they can't find housing. The housing crisis has gotten to a point where we should declare it an emergency and start thinking outside the box to take action, because it is impacting so many people. And if you have housing now, I have housing now, we should consider ourselves really, really fortunate and blessed, because so many people don't. And I do feel like that low quality of life makes it a place where people won't want to live here. And then we'll never diversify our economy if the only people who live here are people who can't leave because they have no.
I'm going to stop you for only one reason. First of all, it's because we're running out of time. But it's really been a pleasure here. And obviously, your passion for running is very clear. And I'm happy to be in this contest with you, because I don't feel a contest. I feel like we're going to come out with the public will choose what they want, but it's refreshing to know there's a spirit and the power and someone who cares for local people like you do. I hope this has been a good experience for you, Cara, and I hope that the public realizes that the most important they can do is get out there and vote and be part of this process, and don't just leave it up to those other people that may be involved. Let your passions come out and come and say hi on the voting.
I encourage people to not be cynical. I know it's easy to do, especially in this time. Don't give up. Don't lose hope. Even if our future is harder than our past moving forward, humans are really resilient. And when we come together, we can do amazing things. And it only takes a small group of people to really change the entire trajectory of where we're going. A very small group of people with a lot of heart and a lot of care and passion. And I think we do have that here. So,
and in history, everyone uses that quote from Margaret Mead. It is the only thing that ever has, is a small group of committed people. So here we are. Please join us. Cara, it has really been a pleasure. And I don't really mean to cut you off. We'll have to come back again. You are most welcome here at the Neutral Zone. And if there's anything that I can do as we're in this campaign season, don't hesitate, please.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason. So nice to talk with you.
Thank you. And to our audience out there, thank you for joining us. Please be involved in this process. Get out and vote. And I hope you're having a great day and continue. Aloha, everyone.